Ladies and gentlemen, let me start with a simple truth: sovereignty is not given. It is asserted. And when a nation chooses to assert it, the world notices. Today I want to talk about one bold move by India, a move that shook the foundations of global diplomacy and reminded the world, especially the United States, that respect for sovereignty is non-negotiable. No calls, no deals, just India's sovereign decision. In the corridors of power, decisions are often measured by the immediate gain or the appeasement of stronger nations. But India chose a path less traveled, a path defined not by pressure, not by persuasion, and certainly not by shortcuts, but by principles. When the US, the global superpower, expected compliance, it was met with a firm, unflinching stand. India's move was not just a diplomatic maneuver. It was a statement, a declaration that no amount of global influence can undermine the will of a sovereign nation. This decision, ladies and gentlemen, was bold because it was rooted in courage and clarity. In a world where alliances often overshadow ethics, India reminded the world that sovereignty is sacred. This was not a decision made for applause or recognition, but for the dignity of the nation, for the voice of its people, and for the legacy it intends to leave. The move humiliated not out of spite, but by the sheer force of principle over pressure, of conviction over compromise. When nations rely on negotiations and backdoor deals to shape outcomes, India showed that courage can speak louder than words. While some may interpret diplomacy as yielding to the strongest, India proved that true diplomacy is staying true to one's values, even in the face of immense pressure. And in doing so, it sent a clear message: that influence has its limits, but principle is limitless. Let us remember that history is written not by those who seek approval, but by those who dare to act. India's bold step is more than just a geopolitical headline. It is a lesson in leadership, in courage, and in the unshakable power of self-determination. The world may react, the pundits may analyze, but the essence remains unchanged. A sovereign nation has spoken, and it will not be silenced. Sovereignty is the very essence of a nation's identity, the invisible yet unbreakable thread that binds a country's history, culture, and future together. It is not a privilege granted by others, nor is it a commodity to be negotiated or bartered in corridors of power. It is a principle, a stance, and a responsibility that rests on the shoulders of every nation and every leader who claims to represent its people. India's recent bold move demonstrates this principle with remarkable clarity, showing the world that sovereignty is asserted through conviction and courage, not diminished by fear or external pressure. When faced with expectations from global superpowers, it would have been easy for any nation to yield, to engage in endless consultations, calls, and backroom deals that promise temporary relief but erode long-term autonomy. Yet India chose a path that few dare to trade then. It chose the path of asserting its right to self-determination, proving that the will of the nation is stronger than the weight of foreign influence. To understand the magnitude of this act, one must first understand that sovereignty is not merely about borders or armies. It is about the freedom to make decisions that serve the nation's interests, uphold its principles, and reflect the aspirations of its people. India's stance was a direct message that such freedom is not negotiable, that no external pressure, regardless of its origin, can override the voice of the nation. In the global context, where power often dictates outcomes and influence is used as leverage, India's assertion becomes even more significant. It is a statement that while alliances and relationships are important, they can never come at the cost of compromising fundamental national interests. Sovereignty demands that a nation stands firm, even when the currents of diplomacy are turbulent, when expectations are high, and when the eyes of the world are scrutinizing every move. India's action reflects an understanding of this responsibility. It is not reactive. It is proactive. It is not opportunistic. It is principled. By making a decision rooted in sovereignty, India demonstrated that the country's future cannot be dictated by short-term gains or the desire to appease powerful nations. History is filled with examples of nations that lost their identity by yielding to external pressures, And India's choice represents a conscious break from that tradition. This move also sends a powerful signal internally to the citizens that their country values independence and integrity above all else. When leaders make decisions that uphold sovereignty, they inspire confidence, unity, and pride among the people. India's assertion, therefore, is not just a political act on the global stage. It is a reaffirmation of the nation's self-respect and its commitment to its own principles. It redefines the dynamics of international engagement by placing the nation's values at the center of every decision, reminding the world that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned through fairness, consistency, and independence. The boldness of this act lies not in confrontation, but in the quiet, unwavering commitment to what is right for the nation. It challenges assumptions that power alone dictates outcomes and reorients the conversation toward the idea that nations, regardless of size or influence, can and must act with autonomy. In asserting its sovereignty, India has not only strengthened its position on the global stage, but also reinforced the timeless principle that true leadership arises from courage, clarity, and adherence to core values, principles that do not bend to expedience or coercion. Boldness without principle is mere recklessness, a fleeting gesture that may grab attention but leaves no lasting impact. True boldness, however, is anchored in clarity of purpose, in a deep understanding of what is right and necessary for the nation. India's recent decision demonstrates this kind of boldness, one that is inseparable from principle and that speaks volumes about the country's character and leadership. When faced with immense global pressure, when the expectations of powerful nations weigh heavily on the scales of diplomacy, it would have been far easier to seek compromise, to negotiate endlessly, and to accept concessions in exchange for temporary comfort. But India chose a different path, a path defined not by convenience but by conviction. The decision was not made in haste or for immediate applause. It was made after careful consideration of the nation's values, its long-term interests, and the message it wished to send to the world. Boldness rooted in principle is not about defiance for its own sake. It is about acting in alignment with moral clarity and national integrity, even when the costs are high. In an age where geopolitical maneuvering often reduces relationships to transactions, India's action reminds the world that principled decision-making still matters, that a nation's honor cannot be weighed against fleeting expediency. This form of boldness is transformative because it shifts the conversation from what can be coerced to what must be respected. It asserts that no external expectation, no matter how persuasive, can override the conscience of a sovereign nation. India's stance was a demonstration that courage without a moral foundation is hollow, but courage guided by principle resonates across borders, inspiring both respect and reflection. This is why the move is considered so remarkable. It combined strategic foresight with ethical steadfastness, ensuring that the nation's actions were both wise and just. By prioritizing principle over pressure, India not only safeguarded its immediate interests, but also reinforced the long-term strength of its international credibility. Boldness rooted in principle also serves as a lesson for leadership at every level. It is easy to follow trends, to adapt to expectations, and to yield when confronted by more powerful forces. But true leadership emerges when decisions are made in accordance with values that endure beyond the moment. India's example highlights that principled boldness commands respect not through threats or force, but through the undeniable weight of righteousness. This approach fosters a culture of trust, both domestically and internationally, where actions are predictable not because they are forced, but because they are consistent with deeply held beliefs. Moreover, this kind of boldness resonates with the citizens of the nation, reinforcing the sense that their leaders act with integrity, that their country is guided by a compass that points firmly toward justice and national interest. It strengthens the social fabric, instills pride, and inspires confidence in the country's path forward. When nations act boldly yet wisely, they do more than make headlines. They redefine expectations, reset norms, and demonstrate that courage aligned with principle has the power to influence global dynamics, reshape perceptions, and assert a nation's place in the world order. In the intricate dance of international diplomacy, nations often act according to expectations, whether implicit or explicit, set by those with greater power or influence. These expectations shape policies, decisions, and alliances, creating an environment where smaller or emerging nations may feel compelled to conform or compromise. India's recent bold move, however, represents a deliberate challenge to these global expectations, then sending a powerful message that the will of a sovereign nation cannot be predetermined or manipulated. When the world anticipated compliance or acquiescence, India chose autonomy, demonstrating that respect for its decisions must come from recognition of its sovereignty, not the weight of influence. This challenge is not a matter of defiance for its own sake. It is a statement of strategic clarity, a declaration that a nation's priorities are determined by its people, its principles, and its vision for the future rather than by external pressures or assumptions. In doing so, India disrupts the conventional understanding of international relations, which often equates strength with the ability to enforce expectations rather than the ability to respect independent decision-making. By defying these expectations, India forces the global community to reconsider the balance of power, reminding influential nations that influence has boundaries and that ethical and principled action is not only possible but necessary for long-term stability. This challenge extends beyond immediate diplomatic consequences. It shapes perceptions, alters narratives, and reinforces the notion that every nation, regardless of size or power, has a voice that must be heard and a decision-making process that must be respected. India's move underscores that international expectations, when imposed unilaterally, can overlook the complexities, aspirations, and values of the nations involved. By asserting its independence in decision-making, India challenges the assumption that global influence can dictate outcomes, creating a precedent that may inspire other nations to act in accordance with their own principles rather than external pressures. This is particularly significant in a world where alliances and partnerships are often evaluated through the lens of compliance rather than mutual respect. India's stance redefines what it means to be a responsible global actor. It is not about yielding to expectations, but about engaging with the world from a position of strength, clarity, and integrity. Furthermore, challenging global expectations requires not just courage but strategic foresight. India's decision demonstrates an understanding of timing, context, and consequence, ensuring that its challenge is both principled and pragmatic. It is a reminder to the international community that sovereignty is not only a right, but also a responsibility. A responsibility to act with discernment, to prioritize long-term national interest, and to uphold values that endure beyond transient political pressures. By navigating this delicate balance, India exemplifies a form of leadership that is increasingly rare in international relations, one that resists manipulation, prioritizes principle, and asserts the nation's priorities on its own terms. The impact of this challenge is profound, resonating not only in diplomatic circles, but also in the collective consciousness of global observers, reinforcing the idea that nations cannot be measured solely by their compliance or alignment with powerful actors, but by their capacity to act decisively and independently in pursuit of their own vision and interests, thereby reshaping expectations and perceptions of what true sovereignty entails in the complex arena of international relations. Diplomacy is often perceived as a game of negotiation, compromise, and strategic appeasement, where nations must carefully weigh the demands of more powerful actors against their own interests. Yet, true diplomacy is far more than mere transactional exchange. It is the art of representing a nation's values, principles, and long-term interests with clarity, consistency, and integrity. India's recent bold decision exemplifies this higher form of diplomacy, one that does not bend to pressure or succumb to expectation, but instead operates from a foundation of moral and strategic integrity. Integrity in diplomacy is the recognition that respect is earned through consistent, principled action, not temporary concessions or superficial gestures. By refusing to engage in endless calls or make deals that compromise its core interests, India demonstrated that diplomacy can be courageous, clear, and effective without sacrificing sovereignty. This approach challenges the conventional notion that nations must yield to the strongest or most influential partners to maintain international relationships. Instead, it affirms that authentic engagement with the world arises from honesty, transparency, and adherence to values, and that long-term credibility is built on the unshakable principle of acting in accordance with national interests. Diplomacy through integrity requires foresight and courage because it often places a nation at odds with prevailing expectations and conventional wisdom. It demands that leaders weigh not just immediate outcomes, but the enduring impact on the nation's reputation, credibility, and moral authority. India's choice reflects this understanding as it carefully balanced assertiveness with responsibility, ensuring that its actions communicated both strength and principle. By prioritizing integrity, India also redefined what it means to negotiate and interact on the global stage. While many nations measure success in terms of concessions gained or agreements signed, India showed that true success lies in preserving autonomy, maintaining ethical consistency, and fostering genuine respect among peers. This form of diplomacy resonates with both domestic and international audiences, reinforcing confidence among citizens that their leaders act with foresight and ethical clarity, while signaling to the world that India's positions are predictable not because they are weak, but because they are principled. Furthermore, diplomacy through integrity has a multiplier effect. By acting in alignment with core values, India sets a standard for others to follow, shaping the expectations of global actors and subtly recalibrating the rules of engagement. It reminds the world that partnerships built on coercion, intimidation, or opportunistic compromise are unstable, whereas relationships grounded in trust, transparency, and shared respect endure. This approach also strengthens India's ability to influence international discourse without resorting to force or transactional bargaining. Integrity becomes the leverage, the quiet power that commands attention, shapes alliances, and asserts authority in subtle yet undeniable ways. India's example demonstrates that when a nation acts with integrity, it communicates confidence, decisiveness, and moral clarity, in establishing a model of diplomacy that is both inspiring and effective. By refusing to compromise its principles, India highlights that ethical consistency is not a constraint but a strategic advantage, one that enhances credibility, fosters respect, and ensures that every interaction is guided by the nation's long-term vision and the values it seeks to uphold. History does not remember fleeting moments or decisions made out of convenience. It remembers courage, principle, and the unwavering commitment of nations to their values and vision. Every significant chapter in the story of the world has been shaped by acts of leadership that dare to challenge expectations, confront pressures, and assert sovereignty with clarity and purpose. India's recent bold decision carries this historical significance, for it is not just a tactical maneuver in the present, but a statement that will resonate far beyond its immediate context. The importance of this act lies in its demonstration that the choices of a nation today can define how it is remembered tomorrow, shaping perceptions of strength, credibility, and integrity for generations to come. When a nation makes a decision rooted in principle rather than expedience, it establishes a precedent, a blueprint for future leaders to act decisively while maintaining alignment with the nation's core values. India's stand reminds the world that history is written not by those who seek approval from the powerful, but by those who remain steadfast in the pursuit of justice, fairness, and national interest. In every era, moments of historical significance have been characterized by clarity of vision, courage in action, and the refusal to succumb to external pressures. India's recent move embodies all of these qualities, ensuring that it will be viewed not merely as a response to immediate geopolitical dynamics, but as a defining moment in the nation's trajectory on the global stage. The historical impact of this decision also lies in the message it sends about national identity and pride. By asserting its sovereignty in the face of formidable expectations, India reaffirms the principle that a nation's legacy is built on courage and principle, not on compliance or temporary gains. This sends a powerful signal to future leaders, policymakers, and citizens that the decisions made today will be evaluated not only in terms of short-term outcomes, but also in terms of their contribution to the enduring reputation of the nation. Historical significance is further amplified when a decision challenges entrenched norms, reshapes diplomatic engagement, and redefines what is possible for other nations. India's action demonstrates that it is possible to act with integrity and principle even when global expectations are stacked against a nation. By doing so, it becomes a model of responsible leadership and sovereignty that other nations may look to as an example. This is particularly relevant in a world where power dynamics often dictate behavior, and nations sometimes yield to external influence in the name of pragmatism. India's decision underscores that pragmatic action and historical significance are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are often intertwined, as principled decisions taken in the present lay the foundation for a legacy that inspires respect and admiration over time. The historical resonance of such a decision also extends beyond borders, influencing perceptions of India's role in global affairs, its approach to diplomacy, and its commitment to national interest. When the actions of a nation are rooted in principle, they transcend temporary political calculations, becoming reference points for what is possible when courage, clarity, and integrity guide leadership. In asserting itself with confidence and purpose, India has ensured that this moment will be remembered as a defining instance of leadership, a turning point in its engagement with the world, and a statement of the values that underpin its national identity, leaving an indelible imprint on the historical narrative of sovereignty, diplomacy, and global respect. Self-determination is the cornerstone of every sovereign nation. The principle that a country has the right, the authority, and the responsibility to chart its own course without external interference. It is more than a political concept. It is the embodiment of national identity, pride, and the collective aspirations of the people. India's recent bold decision exemplifies the power of self-determination in action, demonstrating that a nation's strength lies not in its ability to follow others, but in its courage to make independent, principled choices. The act of self-determination requires vision, confidence, and an unwavering belief in one's national interests, especially when confronted by external pressures or the expectations of more powerful countries. By choosing its own path, India has sent a clear message to the world. True power is derived not from yielding to influence, but from acting decisively in alignment with the nation's values and long-term goals. This principle is particularly relevant in the context of global diplomacy, where the balance of power often tempts nations to compromise their autonomy for temporary advantage. India's assertion shows that a sovereign nation can navigate international relations with intelligence, strategy, and integrity while maintaining full control over its decisions. Self-determination empowers a nation to define its priorities, set its agenda, and take actions that reflect its unique circumstances and objectives. India's move highlights that when a country exercises this power, it strengthens its credibility, reinforces its moral authority, and establishes a foundation for consistent and principled leadership. Furthermore, the power of self-determination inspires confidence among citizens, reinforcing the bond between the nation and the people it represents. When citizens witness their country acting independently and decisively, they are reminded that their collective voice, values, and identity matter in shaping national policy. This strengthens social cohesion, instills pride, and encourages active engagement in the nation's future. On the global stage, self-determination challenges assumptions about influence and control, demonstrating that nations are not merely followers in a hierarchy of power, but active architects of their own destiny. India's recent action reinforces that sovereignty is not a passive state, but an active dynamic process requiring continuous effort, strategic clarity, and principled decision-making. Exercising self-determination also reshapes relationships with other nations, as it demands that partnerships be based on mutual respect rather than coercion or expectation. By acting from a position of autonomy, India has redefined how it engages with allies, competitors, and the global community at large, establishing itself as a nation whose decisions are guided by principle rather than pressure. The true power of self-determination lies in its ability to combine independence with responsibility. India's decision reflects an understanding that freedom to act comes with the duty to act wisely, ethically, and with foresight. It is not a reckless assertion of will, but a deliberate, informed choice that safeguards national interest, upholds values, and ensures that the nation's trajectory aligns with the long-term vision of its leaders and citizens alike. Through this exercise of self-determination, India demonstrates that respect on the global stage is earned not through submission or compliance, but through the unwavering assertion of autonomy, the courage to act with integrity, and the wisdom to balance principle with strategy, showing that a nation that fully embraces its power to determine its own path can command influence, inspire others, and secure its rightful place in history.